It began with something so ordinary, it should have been forgettable. A sleepover at a friend's house after a night out. Brianna Dennison, 19 years old, was visiting her hometown of Reno, Nevada for winter break from Santa Barbara City College. She had just returned from visiting family and decided to stay the night at her best friend's off-campus rental near the University of Nevada, Reno. They had spent the evening watching movies, laughing about relationships, and soaking in the easy warmth of a night surrounded by familiarity. The house was modest but cozy. Brianna was tired. Her friend offered her the couch in the living room. There was no reason to be afraid. This was a quiet neighborhood, filled with college students. The door was locked. The house was safe. When her friend awoke the next morning, January 20th, 2008, she noticed something strange. Brianna wasn't on the couch. The blanket she had been using was neatly folded. Her purse, cell phone, and shoes were still there. Her belongings hadn't moved. It was as if she had evaporated in the middle of the night. There was no note, no sign she had stepped out, just an eerie stillness that settled in like a fog. They searched the house, room by room, calling her name, hoping she had simply gone for a walk. But deep down, they already knew. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. At first, denial offered a small buffer. Maybe she was with another friend. Maybe she had woken up early and decided to grab breakfast. Brianna was responsible, independent, not the type to vanish without saying anything. Her friend called Brianna's cell phone. No answer. Sent a text. Nothing. Hours passed. The possibilities began to narrow, then disappear. By late morning, Brianna's mother, Bridget Dennison, got the call every parent dreads. Her daughter was missing. Reno police were contacted immediately. Officers arrived at the scene, walked through the quiet house, and noted the absence of a struggle. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, but to Bridget, none of it made sense. Her daughter didn't just walk off in the middle of the night without her phone or shoes. The search began that day. Neighbors were questioned, nearby surveillance cameras reviewed, but there were no immediate leads. Flyers were printed. Brianna's photo, radiant and smiling, was suddenly everywhere. Her disappearance gripped the city like a tightening fist. What started as a weekend mystery was becoming a nightmare, one that wouldn't go away. Inside the home, where Brianna vanished, investigators discovered something that didn't belong: a pair of women's blue pajama pants stained with bodily fluid. At first glance, it could have been written off as forgotten laundry. But the house's residents insisted. The pants weren't theirs, and they certainly didn't belong to Brianna. The pants were quickly sent to the forensic lab for DNA analysis. What came back shocked investigators. A male DNA profile was found, and that same DNA profile was already in the system. It had been linked to at least 2 sexual assaults near the UNR campus over the past year. Both unsolved, both eerily similar in method. The significance was chilling. Brianna hadn't been taken randomly. She had been hunted by a man who had done this before. A man growing bolder, more confident, more dangerous. Reno was no longer dealing with a missing person. They were chasing a serial predator. And Brianna's case had just become the center of a terrifying pattern. The link between Brianna's disappearance and the previous assaults revealed a deeply disturbing pattern. In both earlier cases, the attacker struck in the early morning hours. He entered through unlocked doors. He used condoms, reducing his biological footprint. He carried zip ties, and he spoke little. What he lacked in words, he made up for in control. Each detail reflected meticulous planning and a terrifying familiarity with his surroundings. Both survivors, brave college women, described their attacker similarly. Though he wore a mask, his build was solid. His movements were confident. One of them had seen his eyes, cold, calculating, as if he had done it many times before. Now, police knew. Brianna had not stumbled into danger. She had been targeted. Her abduction was not a fluke. It was the escalation of a predator who had walked among them undetected. He didn't just break into that house by chance. He knew exactly where to go, Who would be there, and how to take her without making a sound? The city began to shudder under a new weight: fear. As days passed and no trace of Brianna surfaced, her case exploded across national headlines. It wasn't just a local story anymore. Networks picked it up. Talk shows invited her mother to speak. Billboards and digital signs broadcast her image with one haunting question: "Have you seen Brianna?" Her face, young, fresh, unscarred by the cruelty she had endured, became a symbol for every parent with a daughter, for every student who walked home late at night. The entire city of Reno seemed to hold its breath. Candlelight vigils were held on campus. Hundreds of people marched with flyers, searching alleyways and dumpsters. Helicopters scanned rooftops. Psychics volunteered visions. Hope became a fragile thread holding the community together. Bridget Dennison, steely and unwavering, became the voice of the search. She refused to leave Reno, refused to rest. She clung to the belief that her daughter was still alive, somewhere, waiting to be found. She spoke at press conferences with a heartbreaking blend of clarity and desperation. "We just want Brianna back. If you know something, anything, please come forward." But days turned to weeks, and silence became louder than ever. The sense of dread that had settled over Reno wasn't just about Brianna anymore. It was the realization that someone had been watching, stalking, and attacking women, possibly for months, without getting caught. The community that had once felt relatively safe was now living under the constant fear of a predator who walked among them, unseen. Women stopped going out alone at night. Parents picked up their daughters from class. Doors were double-locked, windows nailed shut. But it all felt too late. The profile law enforcement was building described someone methodical, someone who knew the UNR area intimately, knew which houses had female tenants, which doors were left unlocked, which neighborhoods felt safe enough to relax security. The police didn't say it out loud at first, but the truth hung heavy in every meeting. This wasn't a first-time offender. This man had practiced. FBI profilers were called in. They believed the suspect likely lived in Reno, maybe even close to campus. He was probably in his 20s or early 30s with a clean appearance, someone who wouldn't stand out in a crowd, a man who could blend in with students, possibly even pose as one. That was what made him so dangerous. For investigators, it was a race against time. If he had done this before and gotten away with it, he could do it again. And if Brianna wasn't already gone, he might still be holding her. Every day mattered, every hour. But there were no ransom calls, no messages, no signs of life, just a void. Weeks passed with little progress, until a crucial piece of evidence emerged. Investigators received confirmation that the male DNA found on the blue pajama pants belonged to the same person who had assaulted 2 women in 2007. This meant they weren't chasing a ghost anymore. They had a genetic fingerprint. But there was a problem. The DNA wasn't in the National CODIS database. The suspect had never been arrested for a felony. He had slipped through the cracks of the justice system, living in anonymity despite committing violent crimes. So the police launched a new strategy. They started testing people voluntarily. Hundreds of men who lived or worked near campus were asked to submit DNA samples. Most cooperated. A few refused, raising red flags. But without probable cause, the police couldn't force anyone. It became a game of patience, pressure, and observation. Meanwhile, the community rallied. A $150,000 reward was offered. Volunteers canvassed neighborhoods. Campus security was ramped up, and the university even offered self-defense classes. But beneath it all was an inescapable question. Was Brianna still alive? Her mother held on to hope, even as the days dragged into weeks. She still believed Brianna could be rescued. But behind the scenes, detectives were beginning to prepare for another reality, a darker, quieter one. Then, in early February, a call came in that would change everything. It was a cold February morning, and the caller sounded nervous. A maintenance worker had noticed something unusual in a remote field off Double R Boulevard, on the south end of Reno. It was a stretch of land not far from a light industrial park, quiet, isolated, rarely traveled. Hidden beneath a pile of brush and debris was something human, something unmistakable. Police arrived and immediately cordoned off the area. What they found confirmed every parent's worst fear: the decomposing body of a young woman. Her features were partially obscured by exposure and time, but they found something else, a familiar item of clothing. A distinctive piece that matched the description Brianna had been wearing the night she vanished. Dental records would later confirm it. It was Brianna Dennison. The news shattered her family. Bridget Dennison, who had refused to leave Reno since the day her daughter disappeared, collapsed in grief. The hope she had carried like a torch in a storm was extinguished in a single moment. No longer a missing person, Brianna was now the victim of a brutal murder. Autopsy results revealed she had been raped and strangled. A used condom was found near the body, and from it, investigators extracted more of the suspect's DNA. It matched the previous samples perfectly. The killer was now not just a rapist. He was a murderer. This wasn't a man who was going to stop. He was still out there. After the discovery of Brianna's body, the tone of the investigation shifted. Urgency gave way to obsession. Detectives weren't just looking for answers anymore. They were hunting a predator who had now escalated from sexual assault to murder. They scoured everything: past sexual assaults, cold cases, even incidents dismissed as misunderstandings. Any detail, no matter how small, might unlock the killer's identity. And then came something chilling: a letter. It wasn't sent by the killer, but by a woman who had survived him. She told police that she had been abducted the previous year in the exact same area. She had been walking home near campus when a man in a dark SUV pulled up, pointed a weapon at her, and forced her inside. He wore a ski mask. He drove her to a secluded location and assaulted her. Then, miraculously, he let her go. Her story was consistent, vivid, and horrifying. She remembered the SUV. She remembered his voice. And she remembered the chilling calmness with which he operated. It was as if he had done it before. The problem? When she first reported the assault, it hadn't been treated seriously. Her case was one of several in the area at the time. With no suspect, no security footage, and little public pressure, the case faded into silence. Now, with Brianna dead, her warning read like a scream no one had heard in time. Investigators now believed they were looking for a serial rapist who had been escalating for months, if not years. The profile became clearer: a man who targeted women walking alone at night, a man who used his vehicle, likely a dark-colored SUV, to force them into submission, a man who likely blended in, held a job, maybe even had a family, someone who didn't look like a monster, but was. The survivor's account reignited the investigation. She described the SUV in detail: a newer model, dark blue or black Nissan. The interior, she recalled, smelled like cleaning chemicals. She noticed children's toys in the back seat, which shook her even more. Her attacker wasn't some vagrant or drifter. He might be a father. This lead gave detectives a new direction. They began compiling a list of registered owners of similar vehicles within a certain radius of the university. It was slow, grinding work, requiring patience and coordination across multiple agencies. At the same time, they were working with the survivor to develop a composite sketch of the man's face, what little she'd seen of it. Meanwhile, the media blitz had taken on a life of its own. News stations ran constant updates. Talk shows invited Brianna's family. The reward money grew, but under the surface, so did anxiety. People in Reno began to realize the killer wasn't an out-of-town monster who had passed through. He was a neighbor, a coworker, a face they might pass in the grocery store, Some people remembered seeing that dark SUV parked near houses with young women. Others recalled odd encounters, a man lingering, staring, circling. Tips flooded in, hundreds of them. Most went nowhere. But detectives were patient. They were waiting for the one detail that didn't just feel suspicious, it matched the science. That moment was coming. While tips poured in and sketches were circulated, investigators were laser-focused on one thing: DNA. They had the killer's full genetic profile, twice from the previous rapes, once from Brianna's body. Now they just needed someone to match it. They started discreetly collecting DNA from men who matched the profile and lived in the area. Some were asked to volunteer samples. Others were tracked more subtly: cigarette butts, discarded cups, anything they touched. The list narrowed further when they cross-referenced vehicle records with proximity to the crime scenes. And then came James Biela. He didn't stand out at first. A former Marine, Biela was living in Reno with his girlfriend and their young son. He had previously worked as a pipe fitter. He owned a dark blue Nissan Pathfinder. He matched the physical profile. He had lived near the location of the previous assaults. When detectives quietly approached his girlfriend and asked her to provide a DNA sample from her child, she agreed, unaware of the implication. The child's DNA linked directly to the attackers. The conclusion was inescapable. The father of the boy was the man who had raped and murdered Brianna Dennison. Biela had no idea that the net was closing in around him. Once the DNA match was confirmed, detectives moved quickly. They surveilled James Biela around the clock. They wanted to see how he moved, who he contacted, whether he posed a continued threat. He was cool, composed, and completely unsuspecting. Then they brought him in for questioning. In the interview room, Biela was polite, even cooperative. But when detectives confronted him with the DNA evidence, his mask began to crack. He denied everything, said he didn't know Brianna, didn't remember anything unusual. But the calm began to fray at the edges. When they mentioned the condom found with Brianna's body, when they told him it held his DNA, he went silent. His attorneys advised him to stop speaking. But the investigators didn't need a confession. The science had already spoken. James Biela was arrested and charged with the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Brianna Dennison. He was also connected to the earlier assaults. The community that had lived in fear finally had a name, a face, to attach to the monster who had haunted them. But for Brianna's family, the arrest was bittersweet. They had justice in hand, but the daughter they loved was never coming back. And the trial was only beginning. It was a crisp morning in Reno when the trial of James Biela officially began. Outside the courthouse, news crews clustered like vultures, their lenses fixed on every expression, every tear, every twitch of emotion that might pass over a grieving mother's face. Inside, the air felt heavier, suffocating almost. Brianna's family took their seats silently. They had waited over a year for this day, and yet no amount of time could prepare them to face the man accused of taking her from them. James Biela sat at the defense table in a crisp dress shirt, his hands folded neatly. He looked ordinary, forgettable even. Not the face of a monster, some whispered. But Brianna's mother, Bridget, never looked away from him, not once. If Biela was hoping to appear harmless, his eyes betrayed him, cold, calculating, empty. The prosecution opened with power and precision. They laid out the timeline, the brutality, the sheer terror Brianna must have endured. They spoke directly to the jury, reminding them that this wasn't just a legal case. It was a human story. A college student full of dreams, a daughter, a sister, a friend. They presented the DNA evidence, airtight and undeniable. They brought in the survivor of Biela's previous assault. Her voice trembled as she recounted her attack, but she didn't back down. "That man," she said, pointing at Biela, "is the one who raped me, and I was lucky. I lived." The defense, by contrast, fumbled. They challenged the timeline. They questioned evidence chain of custody. They hinted at reasonable doubt. But the jury listened to Brianna's mother speak about her daughter's final phone call. They listened to her best friend describe the nightmare of waking up and realizing Brianna had vanished. And they heard from the forensic experts. Clean, clinical, irrefutable. The case wasn't just strong, it was devastating. As the trial continued, experts were called to speak about what kind of person could commit such crimes. A forensic psychologist testified, walking the jury through the profile of a predator like Biela. "He's organized," she said. "He plans, he stalks, he escalates." She explained how men like him often begin with voyeurism or fantasy. Then comes assault. Then, if not stopped, murder. The prosecution detailed the steps Biela took, using condoms to avoid DNA, wiping down his vehicle, choosing victims who were alone and vulnerable. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a cold-blooded pattern. They showed the jury his cell phone records, his travel patterns, even his internet history, searches for violent porn and abduction fantasies. A clear portrait was forming. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. James Biela was a predator who had slipped under society's radar, masked by fatherhood and a steady job. But inside, he was boiling with hatred, control issues, and an addiction to domination. The jury watched him closely. He never cried. He never apologized. He showed no signs of remorse. Even as the evidence stacked higher, he stared forward like a man reading a grocery list. To Brianna's family, that silence was louder than any confession. When the jury finally retreated to deliberate, the courtroom felt like it stopped breathing. Brianna's family waited, holding hands, praying silently. It took them only a few hours. Guilty. The word echoed through the room like thunder. Guilty on all counts: kidnapping, sexual assault, and first-degree murder. Some jurors cried as the verdict was read. Bridget Dennison broke down, sobbing into her hands as friends and relatives wrapped around her. But the trial wasn't over. Now came the sentencing phase and the possibility of the death penalty. Prosecutors argued for it unapologetically. This wasn't just murder, the DA said. This was calculated, prolonged suffering. Brianna was taken from her home, held against her will, raped, strangled, and discarded like trash. If this doesn't meet the standard for capital punishment, what does? The defense pleaded for mercy. They spoke of Biela's childhood, his military service, his young son who would grow up without a father. They argued that he could be rehabilitated in prison, but the words rang hollow. The jury didn't take long. James Biela was sentenced to death. Some felt justice had finally been served. Others knew nothing could ever be enough. In the aftermath of the verdict, something unexpected began to grow out of the pain. A movement. Brianna's mother, Bridget, refused to let her daughter's story fade into just another tragic headline. She became an activist for victims' rights, founding the Brianna Dennison Foundation, which focused on education, prevention, and legislative reform. She helped push forward laws in Nevada that required more consistent DNA testing for sexual assault kits and better tracking of sex offenders. The public rallied around her. Brianna's face became a symbol of both loss and change, her memory a call to action. Universities across the state reviewed their campus safety protocols. The use of emergency alerts and improved security measures became common. Young women started carrying safety alarms. Self-defense workshops filled with attendees. Reno had learned a bitter lesson, and it refused to repeat it. Bridget once said in an interview, "Brianna's light didn't die, it spread." And it was true. In her name, laws changed. Awareness grew. Survivors found their voice. James Biela still sits on death row, his appeals winding slowly through the courts. But his name is a footnote now. The story that endures is Brianna's, a young woman full of life whose brutal loss galvanized a community, a life stolen, a legacy born from grief. After his sentencing, James Biela was transferred to Ely State Prison, a stark, isolated maximum security facility in the Nevada desert. There, among the state's most dangerous inmates, he awaited the fate determined by the jury: death. But the American justice system moves slowly, especially when it comes to capital punishment. Appeals were automatic, and Biela's legal team began filing motions almost immediately, attempting to challenge everything from DNA collection procedures to the validity of witness testimonies. But the evidence against him remained overwhelming. His DNA wasn't just found on Brianna's body, it had been tied to other assaults. His silence throughout the investigation, his refusal to confess, and his cold demeanor during trial did nothing to help him. To the public, and especially to Brianna's family, his guilt wasn't just proven in court. It was carved into their lives permanently. Inside Ely, Biela lived in a small concrete cell, mostly in solitude. No access to general population. Meals passed through a slot. 1 hour outside, alone. The rest of the time, locked in silence. A far cry from the life he once lived, driving his truck freely, playing with his son, walking through campus neighborhoods as a predator in plain sight. Some who knew Biela before the crime still struggled to believe it. A few former co-workers described him as quiet, respectful, but others remembered red flags: his controlling nature, his jealousy, the anger issues that simmered just beneath the surface. Now, behind bars, there was no mask left to wear. He was what the evidence showed: a rapist, a killer, a man who stole a life and shattered many others. Even after the verdict and sentencing, Brianna's family faced the long, unending ache of her absence. There were no more police briefings or trial hearings to focus on. Just birthdays without her, empty chairs at dinner, a bedroom kept exactly the way she left it. Bridget Dennison, Brianna's mother, once described the grief as a fog you live inside. At times, she would reach for her phone instinctively to text Brianna before remembering. The ache came in waves, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but always there. And for her brother and friends, life felt like a before and after line had been drawn through their world. Brianna had been the glue in many circles, the funny, warm, reliable friend, the girl who remembered birthdays and made playlists for road trips. In grief counseling groups, Bridget met other parents who had lost children to violence, and for the first time, she felt seen. But even then, she never allowed her daughter's name to be forgotten. She spoke at events. She educated others about the importance of early action when a person goes missing. She helped pass laws that would keep other families from waiting in fear the way she had. Still, she never stopped missing her. Some nights she would sit by Brianna's bed and talk aloud. "You should be 25 now," she whispered once. "You should be falling in love, traveling the world." The world had kept spinning, but Brianna's time had stopped, and those who loved her lived with that fracture every single day. The aftermath of Brianna's murder led to tangible, lasting changes. One of the most significant impacts was legislative. In 2009, largely due to public pressure and advocacy from Brianna's family, Brianna's Law was passed in Nevada. The law required DNA samples to be collected from anyone arrested for a felony, not just those convicted. This small change had massive implications for solving future crimes and preventing repeat offenders from slipping through the cracks. Had this law been in place when James Biela was first arrested for a prior domestic violence incident, his DNA would have been entered into the system, potentially linking him to earlier sexual assaults or even preventing Brianna's death altogether. The law became a model for similar reforms across the country, and it was a hard-fought win, one born not from politics, but from personal agony. Brianna's story gave lawmakers the emotional fuel they needed to prioritize public safety over bureaucratic red tape. Meanwhile, university campuses across Nevada and beyond reevaluated their safety protocols. Campus alert systems were upgraded. Police response procedures were streamlined. Students were given access to self-defense classes and emergency support. Brianna's death forced institutions to face uncomfortable truths, that predators walk among us, that no place is truly safe unless we make it so, and that swift action and collaboration can be the difference between life and death. Her name became more than just a headline. It became a call to vigilance, a reason to change. Years have passed since Brianna Dennison's body was found in that empty lot in South Reno, and yet her story still echoes through laws, through survivors who found strength in her case, through a mother who turned her heartbreak into hope. The Brianna Dennison Foundation continues to educate communities on the importance of early intervention, victim support, and sexual assault prevention. Bridget often speaks to high school and college students, showing them pictures of Brianna laughing, dancing, living, not just to warn them, but to remind them that Brianna was real, not a statistic, a soul. Each year on the anniversary of her disappearance, friends gather at her old high school. They light candles, they wear blue, her favorite color, and they speak her name. Some say time heals, but for families like the Dennisons, time is a reminder of everything lost. Yet in that pain, they've built something that lasts, a legacy, a lifeline for others, a reminder that even in the darkest stories, there can be light. Brianna didn't survive, but because of her, others might. And that is the heartbreak and the hope of this story. She was loved, she was missed, she still matters.